The officer pulled the trigger, claiming fear. But when the truth came out in court, his tears couldn't save him. What the judge did next shook the entire courtroom and the world watching. It was a calm Sunday evening when Michael Hayes, a 45-year-old U.S. Army veteran, stepped out of the grocery store carrying a small paper bag filled with essentials. Dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, he strolled through his neighborhood, nodding politely to familiar faces along the way. For many in the area, Michael was more than just a neighbor. He was a symbol of quiet strength and service. Having served 2 tours overseas, he returned home to live a peaceful life away from the noise and chaos he had once known. That evening he was simply making his way home like he had done hundreds of times before. But as he reached the corner of 7th and Pine, everything changed. A police cruiser pulled up quickly behind him, lights flashing, tires screeching. Officer Tyler Brooks stepped out, shouting commands. Startled, Michael raised his hands and calmly asked what was going on. Brooks barked that he matched the description of a robbery suspect. Michael reached into his bag, slowly, saying, "I've got my receipt right here," trying to show he had just come from the store. But in a split second, a loud gunshot rang out. Michael stumbled backward and collapsed on the pavement, clutching his side. The receipt fluttered to the ground beside him. Several witnesses screamed. One elderly woman shouted, "Why did you shoot him? He didn't do anything." A teenager across the street captured the whole thing on video, his hands shaking as he recorded. The officer stood frozen, radioing for backup, while blood began to pool beneath Michael's body. Within minutes, ambulances arrived. Michael was still conscious, his breathing shallow, his face full of confusion and pain. As paramedics worked quickly, the crowd grew angry, afraid, and heartbroken. A man who had served his country was shot without warning in his own neighborhood, and all he had in his hand was a receipt. What should have been a quiet walk home had turned into the beginning of something much bigger, something the city would never forget. The news of Michael Hayes' shooting spread through the city like wildfire. Within hours, the video recorded by the teenager across the street had gone viral online, showing the moment an unarmed veteran was gunned down without provocation. People couldn't believe their eyes. A man with groceries in one hand and a receipt in the other was treated like a criminal without reason or hesitation. By morning, crowds gathered outside City Hall demanding answers. Posters with Michael's face and bold letters reading "Justice for Michael" appeared across neighborhoods, on cars, and in shop windows. Local news stations ran the story repeatedly, and national media began picking it up. The police department, under intense pressure, released a brief statement calling it an unfortunate incident under investigation. But for the community, that wasn't enough. Michael remained in the hospital recovering from a gunshot wound to his lower side. He was lucky to be alive, but the emotional weight of what had happened was heavier than the physical pain. He couldn't stop thinking about how quickly things had spiraled, how his military training and calm response had still not been enough to protect him from being misjudged. In a quiet hospital room, surrounded by family and friends, Michael kept asking the same question: why did he shoot me? Meanwhile, Officer Tyler Brooks had been placed on administrative leave. His defenders argued that he made a split-second decision in a tense situation. But that argument was falling apart in the face of video evidence. The people weren't angry only for Michael, they were tired of a system that seemed to ignore truth and accountability. Protests remained peaceful, but powerful. Veterans, teachers, students, and families marched together. Their message was clear: this time justice had to be served. As pressure built and more details emerged, the city braced itself for what would come next, a court case that promised to either restore faith in justice or shatter it completely. And at the center of it all was Michael, a man who had once fought for his country, now fighting to be seen as human. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Journalists, activists, and community members filled every seat, while many more stood outside holding signs in quiet solidarity. Inside, Michael Hayes sat beside his legal team, his posture calm but eyes heavy with emotion. Across the room stood Officer Tyler Brooks, wearing a suit, looking pale and nervous. As the proceedings began, the prosecution laid out the case with precision. Michael Hayes, an unarmed war veteran, was shot without cause during a mistaken stop. They showed photos of the receipt that had fallen beside Michael's body. They displayed images of the grocery bag, now bloodstained. And then came the video, raw shaky footage captured by the teenager, played on the courtroom screen. Gasps filled the room as the video showed Michael standing calmly, raising a piece of paper, and then collapsing instantly after a single gunshot. There was no weapon, no sudden movement, no threat, just confusion, pain, and silence. Officer Brooks watched the footage with his head down. When it was his turn to testify, his voice cracked. He said he had been responding to a call and believed Michael matched the suspect's description. He claimed he thought Michael was reaching for a gun and panicked. As he spoke, tears rolled down his cheeks. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he said. "I just reacted." But the prosecution pushed back hard. "You reacted to your fear, not to a threat. You never even gave him a chance," the lawyer said firmly. The judge listened quietly, carefully, never interrupting. "Michael, to remain still throughout, his eyes fixed on the floor. The people in the courtroom weren't just listening to a case. They were witnessing a moment that could define the future of justice in their city. And as the evidence mounted and the truth became harder to deny, the courtroom shifted from a place of legal process to one of reckoning. Everyone could feel it. This case was no longer just about one shooting. It was about every time fear had been mistaken for danger, and silence had followed a gunshot. The courtroom was silent as the judge prepared to speak. The evidence had been heard, the arguments made, and now everyone waited. The weight in the room was heavy, not just from the case itself, but from what it meant to so many watching. Judge Alina Morrison, known for her calm yet firm presence, looked directly at Officer Tyler Brooks as she began. Her voice was steady, but her words struck deep. This court has reviewed every piece of evidence, every witness statement, and every second of video footage. What happened on that street was not a matter of confusion. It was a failure of judgment fueled by fear. Officer Brooks sat still, his eyes red from days of crying in court, but there were no more tears now. The room remained still as the judge continued. Mr. Hayes posed no threat. He was calm, he was cooperative. He was holding a grocery receipt, not a weapon, and yet you pulled the trigger. Not out of necessity, but out of fear and assumption. That kind of decision has no place in law enforcement. Murmurs moved through the crowd, but the judge raised a hand gently, signaling for quiet. She turned her gaze toward Michael. Mr. Hayes, you served your country with honor, and instead of gratitude, you were met with suspicion and violence. In your own neighborhood. This court owes you more than words. Michael didn't speak, but his eyes glistened. He simply nodded. Then came the verdict. Officer Tyler Brooks is hereby found guilty of reckless use of deadly force and abuse of authority. Gasps echoed in the courtroom, followed by silence again. The judge added, let this case serve as a reminder, badges do not come with unchecked power, and fear cannot be an excuse for injustice. As the gavel came down, some in the courtroom held back tears, while others let them fall freely. The verdict wasn't just for Michael, it was for every person who ever feared they might not survive a simple walk home. And for the first time in a long while, justice felt real. Courtroom was tense as everyone awaited the sentencing. Officer Tyler Brooks stood before the judge, no longer in uniform, his hands clasped tightly, his face pale and drained. Behind him his attorney offered quiet words of comfort, but nothing could soften the reality of what was coming. Judge Morrison addressed the court with a firm voice. This was not a case of a dangerous confrontation or a criminal act. It was a peaceful man, a veteran, simply walking home with groceries. What happened to Mr. Hayes should never have happened. She paused, letting the silence settle before continuing. Officer Brooks, your actions not only wounded a man physically, but you also deeply harmed a community already struggling with trust and fear. Michael sat quietly among his family. Though the scar on his body was healing, the emotional weight remained. Still, he had shown grace through every stage of the trial. He had never shouted, never demanded vengeance, only truth. The judge turned her attention to him briefly. Mr. Hayes, your patience and dignity in the face of injustice have reminded this court what true strength looks like. She then delivered the sentence, 5 years in state prison, with no eligibility for early release, and a lifetime ban from serving in any law enforcement capacity. The courtroom remained silent as the sentence echoed through the walls. There were no cheers, no applause, just quiet acceptance, and for many, a sense of long-awaited accountability. As Officer Brooks was led out of the courtroom, he glanced once toward Michael, his face blank, his eyes empty. Michael didn't look back. Instead, he turned toward his mother and gave her a small nod, as if to say, it's over. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, but Michael said little. I just want to live in a place where we don't have to be afraid, he said. Simply, that moment wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. The system had finally listened. And while the pain wouldn't disappear overnight, the sentence marked a small step forward, one built not on fear, but on truth and justice. Months passed, and though the city slowly returned to its daily rhythm, the memory of what happened to Michael Hayes remained alive in the hearts of many. The courthouse where justice was finally served became a symbol of change, a reminder that silence could be broken, and that truth, no matter how delayed, could still rise. Michael's life, however, would never return to what it was before. The scar on his side ached during cold mornings, but it wasn't just the physical pain that lingered. It was the emotional weight of being seen as a threat in a city he once called safe. Still, Michael chose not to live in anger. Instead, he used his voice. He began visiting local schools, speaking to students about his experience, about fear, judgment, and resilience. He stood alongside youth groups and community leaders, not to protest but to teach, to listen, and to heal. People no longer passed him on the street without recognition. Some stopped to thank him. Others apologized. Slowly, the fear that once divided neighborhoods began to soften. The teen who filmed the shooting started a nonprofit dedicated to recording truth and protecting citizens' rights through technology. And Michael, the man once lying helpless on a sidewalk, became a symbol of quiet strength across the city. One afternoon, as he sat on his porch with a cup of tea in hand, watching children ride bikes down the block, Michael smiled. He wasn't the same man he was before the shooting, but he was still standing, still serving, in his own way. Not through battlefields or uniforms, but by showing that dignity can survive even the deepest wounds. And in that quiet strength, the story finally found its end. If this story moved you, let your voice be heard. Like, comment, and share to keep the truth alive. Don't forget to subscribe to Deep Wounds for more powerful real-life stories that matter.